My name is Grace. I'm 25 years old. I am currently pursuing my master's in counseling psychology, which is something I was not sure I was going to be able to do, like just post-secondary in general. Back when I was diagnosed and having seizures, I didn't know what my life was going to look like. So I'm very, very happy that I've been lucky enough to be able to pursue what I wanted to pursue. Yeah, I don't know. That school takes up a lot of my life right now. So I really did not know a ton about epilepsy prior to my diagnosis. I had heard of it. I knew that it involved seizures. That was about all I knew. So I actually had, well, what we thought was my first seizure on my 16th birthday. It was I guess the night of my 16th, so my birthday heading into the next day. I remember something had just felt I just like wasn't I don't know, I wasn't feeling well. My bedroom was in the basement, and for whatever reason, I wasn't feeling well. So I'd gone upstairs and I said to my mom, like, I don't know, I'm not feeling well. I just feel kind of weird. We didn't think much of it. And so I was hanging out in her room and we ended up watching like a show or a movie or something. And I ended up just falling asleep in in her bed with her. And so then my dad, he didn't didn't make me go to my bed. So I fell asleep, and then I guess I had woken up to use the washroom at some point, which was weird because I never really did that. But yeah, I guess I woke up to use the washroom, and I don't this is all just what has been told to me. My mom, so the bathroom, they had an ensuite bathroom in their room. So she woke up at it was like 2, 3 something in the morning. She woke up and she heard like a rhythmic banging. She said it sounded like if you were to put like runners or something into a washing machine or a dryer, and it's just like that repetitive noise. So she woke up and she was all like disoriented and confused, and she looked beside her and I wasn't there, and she's like, "Oh, that's weird." So then she sat there. She said it was probably only like 30 seconds listening, and then finally she's like, "Okay, I don't know what that is. I'm going to go check it out." She figured out that it was coming from the bathroom, and she found me on the floor having like a full-blown seizure, like the traditional that you would see in like a movie or a TV show, the shaking, like eyes rolled to the back of your head. Uh, for that one, I think I had lost control of like my bladder. So, of course, she was like in shock because I'd never had a seizure in my life. And so she said she like screamed out for my dad. He came running and they were just like, what the heck? So they honestly they don't know how long I was having a seizure for because my mom just kind of woke up to the noise. They don't think they think it was only they think it was probably like 2 to 3 minutes. So I eventually did come out of it, and of course, very confused and disoriented, no idea what was going on, and really emotional. Like I started crying because I think I was scared and confused and just didn't know what was going on. Initially, my parents were kind of like just like they're like, "Well, she's like awake now. Like, do we call an ambulance? Do we drive her to the hospital ourselves?" They decided to just drive me to the hospital themselves because I was somewhat normal at that point. That was what we thought was my first seizure. However, for a few months prior to that, I had randomly been fainting. Well, we thought I was fainting. Like it literally was just, yeah, it looks like somebody who, passes out if they see something. Some people get freaked out by like the sight of blood or something and they pass out. And that's basically what it looked like. There was no shaking involved. There was none of the like traditional seizure characteristics that would have made anybody think that it was a seizure. So, anyways, going back to the night of my 16th birthday when I had my first I guess typical seizure, I'll say. So we went to the hospital and they, did an exam on me and stuff and said like physically I was okay, but it obviously was random that I just had a seizure. So the ER doctor that night was like, okay, we're gonna put in a request for like we want to get some imaging done of your brain just to make sure there's no like physical anything going on in my brain, like a tumor or anything like that. I think I I think I ended up going home that night. Like they didn't keep me because I at that point was technically stable. All my vitals were good. But they did put a rush on the request. I think it was either, honestly, it might have been both MRI, CT, I don't remember. And so they said they're going to do that. And then they were also going to refer me to a neurologist, sorry, a pediatric neurologist, because at that time I was still a minor. So that was my very first seizure. I had a few more, like, again, I'll call them traditional seizures that were landing me in the ER each time. And like some of them I was having at school, which, it's not the best, most fun place to have it. I remember so at this point, because not a ton of time had passed, it had to have been like maybe my third seizure at this point. And I had had it at school. I was taken via ambulance to the hospital. My parents met me there, and the on-call pediatric neurologist that day. I didn't have the best experience with her initially. I also have generalized anxiety disorder, and as soon as that neurologist saw that in my chart, immediately their answer was, "Oh, well, it's her anxiety. It's anxiety induced seizures." We weren't like completely dismissing that idea. Like, sure, that's a possibility, but we also were like, I've had anxiety for a few years now. Like I'd had my anxiety diagnosis for a few years at that point. It just seemed odd that all of a sudden I would start having anxiety induced seizures. Of course, being a typical moody teenager, I really did not like that and that answer. And it really bothered me that it was being dismissed because initially the neurologist was like, I honestly don't even think we need to do like the testing, which my parents were like, no, like we're not just gonna stop things here. Like we want this investigated. Like if it is anxiety induced seizures, but we also don't want to be like negligent and miss something. I'm really thankful that my parents were such good advocates for me. So, I had all the imaging done and thank goodness it came back completely normal. There was no like tumors, infections, like nothing physical in my brain that would explain it. And then I had a regular EEG, like just, walking into an appointment one day. So this neurologist that I didn't have a great interaction with, she actually ended up becoming my pediatric neurologist, much to my dismay initially. Yeah, we did that, the regular EEG and the imaging, and she was the one who told us, yeah, like all the imaging's normal. Her EEG doesn't, there's nothing really standing out to us. Like logically, now as a grown adult, I know that she wasn't saying like, haha, I was right. But at the time, it felt very upsetting that I'm like, I really don't feel like this is my anxiety. Like, I know when I'm anxious, and I did not feel anxious leading up to like this, from what I can remember, the seizures. Like, I didn't feel like that. I, voiced my concern, just saying like, I have a pretty good grasp and understanding of my anxiety, and I really don't think that's what this is. Like, are there any other tests that we can do to just be really, really sure? And so she said, she kind of, went back and forth, and she's like, okay, we can do a sleep deprivation EEG. She said, because there are some people who have seizure disorders and their EEGs will come back like normal, or, maybe a little bit wonky, but not like wonky enough to be like, oh yeah, they have epilepsy, or, anything like that. So she agreed to do a sleep deprivation EEG. So I had to stay up for a full 24 hours, which admittedly was a challenge. Okay, we went and had that done. We didn't have the follow-up appointment like that day. It was like a few days after the EEG. And that one had like lit up like a Christmas tree, like showing all the abnormal like spikes in activity. And they were just like, whoa, like, okay, this is like a seizure disorder. I was relieved in the sense of it wasn't about being right. Like, that's not what I wanted. It was just, I felt like people, specific, like the doctors, believing me and were just dismissing it as, oh, another teenage girl with anxiety, which, like, I fully admit I absolutely have anxiety, but I also have epilepsy. So I was relieved in the sense of like, oh my gosh, okay, finally they have like physical proof, like on paper, that they cannot deny that, okay, she does actually have a legitimate, seizure disorder. I was relieved in that sense. So I was finally, it took about, so that from the time that I had started having what we thought like when I was just passing out, that had started about a year before, around like my 15th birthday. And then I ended up having my first actual traditional seizure on my 16th birthday. And then a couple months after that is when I finally got the actual diagnosis of epilepsy. All in all, like, I mean, although I technically didn't start seeing like doctors until those last few months leading up to my diagnosis, it it took about a year. So, yeah, that's a little bit about my diagnosis. With all that being said, I did not like her initially. However, what really stood out to me was that she was somebody who she was willing to admit that she had been wrong. So when she actually did diagnose me, like I genuinely don't think she was doing it like, out of malice. Like she wasn't going out of her way to try and prove some teenager wrong. Like truly in her heart, she had believed that this was my anxiety. She didn't think that this was a traditional seizure disorder. And she ended up actually being a lovely doctor. And I was actually really, really sad when I had to part ways with her when I turned 18. So we started off a little bit rocky, but she ended up being an amazing doctor. And that's what really stood out to me, though, was that, a medical professional was willing to say to me, like, I was wrong, and like, I'm sorry. Not again, not that she wasn't believing me. That's how I had felt at the time, but just that she was, like humble enough, I guess, to say like I was wrong. You do have something. That was really validating for me and really made me feel a lot better. And like, okay, like the doctors don't think I'm losing it. Like it's really there. We have physical proof on paper. So after I actually got the diagnosis, they do like a few tests of like, okay, does she have like I think it's called like photosensitive, where like flashing lights or like strobe lights or anything like that, does that trigger you? So I remember that appointment, I literally sat in a room and just like stared at a light for however long and nothing happened. As far as we know, I am not sensitive to like flashing lights or strobe lights or anything like that. Of course, I'm not gonna like if I'm watching a movie or I'm at a concert or something, I'm not gonna go out of my way to like stare at them. But as far as we know, that's not one of my triggers. What we've established, all of the times that like when we looked back and it's like, okay, I had a seizure on this day, or I've had days where I've had multiple seizures. Like recurring theme was just making sure I need to make sure all of like my basic needs are met. I kind of joke that I'm kind of like a baby. I need to be well rested. I need to be well fed. I need to be well hydrated. Just all of those things are really important. And that's essentially the only thing that we could pinpoint in terms of being like triggering, like, oh, on that day, I had worked late the night before and maybe I didn't get enough sleep, or just things like that. So I'm very, very cautious, I guess I'll say, in terms of, making sure that like if I didn't get a good night's sleep the night prior, like I will take a nap if I need to. And just, yeah, making sure that I'm feeling my body and staying hydrated, which is the most challenging one for me, but I try. I was in high school when I started having seizures. And like I said, my first one had been at home. But then I think actually all of my other ones, unfortunately, were at school. So that wasn't, no teenager wants to be going through that during school, especially high school, where, you're trying to figure yourself and other stuff out. And I was very fortunate though. I went to an all girls private school, which I think was probably a good thing. Not that I have anything against, like guys, but I just think in those more vulnerable moments, I don't know, I just like all of the girls were really kind and like nobody ever made me feel weird. If I did have a seizure one day, when I finally like, was somewhat coherent again, like hours later and had gotten home from the hospital, I'd usually have like texts from people just saying like, "Hey, I just wanted to check in on you, see how you're doing." So that was really, really nice. And I also was very lucky that the school itself was so supportive. Like any accommodations or adaptations they could make for me to just make things easier. They did, like, no hesitation. Most of the teachers, I mean, there was like one, maybe two teachers who were a little weird about it, but the vast majority of them, they were amazing and just supportive to me. Yeah, so I really appreciated that. So I'm very lucky that although that period from so I started having seizures, like again, if I'm thinking, well, okay, if I'm thinking non-traditional seizures, it would have been like 2014, and then like traditional 2015. Then I was put on medication and I was seizure free for, I want to say it was like a year and a bit. And then unfortunately in my senior year, I had like, I don't know if relapse is the right word, but I started having seizures again. And I actually had seven within a 30-minute period at school. So that one was really traumatic, obviously, because there was just so many in such a short period. That, however, that would have been my senior year was 2017. So that was the last time that I had seizures. Thank goodness. Um, I am very lucky that, after that incident, they upped my medication to the max dose. That seems to be working for me. There have not been any more seizures since then. Um, so yeah, like in April, I just passed 8 years seizure free, which is insane to think about. And I'm so incredibly grateful that I have gone that long without having a seizure. But I feel like it also sometimes makes it a little bit harder to like stay connected with the epilepsy community and like with even just with my own diagnosis. Like I can't express like how thankful I am to be in a good place and to be healthy. But when like World Epilepsy Day comes around in March, I find it kind of difficult because it's like, okay, I have this, but I also feel kind of really far removed from it. So like I find myself questioning, do I have like the right to speak on this topic? Like, I know that sounds so silly. That's just I kind of feel like an imposter almost, like, but I haven't been like that version of me in so long that, yeah, I kind of just feel like an imposter when like those kinds of days come around. Overall, I mean, it's definitely, nobody wants to go through this kind of thing, but I feel like I learned a lot about myself, a lot about the healthcare system, a lot about epilepsy, obviously, a lot about just the kindness of other people wanting to, support you when you're going through a tough time. So, I mean, obviously it sucked in the moment, but it was a good, I just think like learning and life experience for me. of course, nothing about, like a diagnosis and figuring out what works for you and what doesn't work for you is straightforward. So I think the one that I'm on now, which is Keppra, or levetiracetam, I think is the like science name for it. Um, so that was, I think, magic number 3, which is the one that I'm currently on. And that's the one we upped when I had like my relapse. So I'm on the max dose of that. And it has obviously been life changing in a good way, because it's kept me stable for so long. Before that, we had tried one that I'm blanking on the name of, and it did not work. Like I kept having seizures, so they're like, okay, clearly this isn't the right medication for you. So then they tried me on lamotrigine, and the only reason I know the name of that one is because I actually ended up being allergic to it. Again, not fun. Um, Thankfully, it's not like, like I didn't have like a life-threatening reaction or anything, but I like my skin got really red and I broke out in hives like all over my body. We had called my neurologist at the time and she had said, okay, like come off of it, and I'll see you. She unfortunately couldn't see me until like 2 days from then. And so I went and saw her and, she did a physical exam. And even at that point, she's like, I can still tell that like, whatever is left in your system, like, because I guess there was still like raised areas like of skin on my body. So that one was not not the one for me. So then they tried me on the Keppra, and that one, don't quote me on this because I could be totally wrong. I think at the time that it was prescribed to me, it was technically considered to be one of those like exceptional drugs or something where the doctor has to like write a letter to, I don't know who they write a letter to, but whoever it is, just basically saying like, this is my patient. She has this diagnosis. We've tried XYZ, either not working for her or she's allergic to it. Like it's not working for her. We need like approval to put her on this one long term. So I don't know if I don't really keep up with, the status of different medications, but I think at this point it might be, it's just like a normal classification now. It's no longer like an exceptional one, but I definitely do remember one of my neurologists, whether it was the pediatric or eventually my adult one, talking about, that they had to submit that letter and like get approval for me to stay on it long term. So yeah, whether or not they keep doing that, I don't know, because I've never had an issue getting it. So I don't know. I mean, like challenges, I would say were more personal in terms of like, yeah, just like I talked about kind of the mental battle and having to get used to kind of my life and like this new version of me. Because I mean, of course, when all this happened, it was like when, most teenagers, they were getting the independence of like a driver's license and things like that. And that was a huge loss for me, was having a lot of my independence taken away. My driver's license was suspended, which like obviously I completely understand that. And I would never ever want to put other people in danger. But it does suck for a 16-year-old. Like that was awful. All my friends were, getting their licenses, driving, and I was just always like, yeah, I can't. Um, I had mentioned earlier, like my bedroom was in the basement. My neurologist was not comfortable with that, so my parents had to kind of make like a second bedroom for me upstairs, which I don't know, maybe that sounds very like privileged of me, like, oh my gosh, I had to move my bedroom upstairs. It just, again, like I had such a cool, like the basement was basically all my own. And like that was the place my friends would come to hang out. And they all loved being at my house because I had this whole basement. And so lost some independence there. I couldn't even like, if I wanted to have a bath, I couldn't, like I had to let my mom know. And I mean, she just had to be aware and like nearby so that she could just, call out to me every couple minutes, like, "Are you good? Are you okay?" And things like that. So those were some like challenges, the losing your independence. But like I said, like I was so, so lucky to be surrounded by such supportive people, like my family, my friends, my school, my best friends. Like they, so I have a rescue medication for when I'm having a seizure. And like my best friends didn't think twice about like, they're obviously the same age as me, but they didn't think twice about, pulling my cheek open, dropping in the rescue med and like massaging it so that I could get that medication in me like as soon as possible. Like there was even some teachers who weren't comfortable doing that. My best friends, they didn't even think twice about that. And one in particular, she was my main kind of nurse. um, but no, she was amazing, and like we're best friends to this day. Like she was in my wedding, I'm gonna be in her wedding next year, so we've remained super close, which I don't know, maybe I partially have this experience to thank for that, because I think you don't really have a choice but to bond with somebody else like that when, you've got that kind of stuff happening. Yeah, so I'm very, very lucky that I was so well supported. Stigma, I don't think the only stigma I can think of was just maybe some of the language that like the older generations of people like in my life were using. And like they meant no harm by it. They like it was not their intent to like be hurtful or anything, but they'd say, oh yeah, she had another one of her fits, or she had an episode today. And it was typically my mom just very gently reminding them, like, just so you know, they actually like they don't say that anymore. Like they'll say, oh, she had a seizure, or just, because that those specific wordings tie back to, like when years and years and years ago, they thought people having a seizure and epilepsy was like you were possessed by like the demon, by Satan, or they at one point epilepsy was believed to be like a mental health condition, and that like you were like insane if you were having seizures. Very gently trying to remind and educate them on those kinds of things, while knowing completely that like they meant no harm by it, and it's strictly like it was a generational thing and they just needed to be educated. I don't know, I kind of think that's it for like stigma. Like misconceptions, honestly, I feel like I was the biggest one who had like the biggest misconceptions about it, of like, when somebody says epilepsy or seizure, you're thinking of the traditional like grand mal tonic-clonic type seizures with the tensing up and the shaking and that kind of stuff. I did not know until I was diagnosed that there's like a bunch of different types of seizures. Like we later realized that, when we thought I was just fainting, no, actually that was a type of seizure. We figured out that I have absent seizures as well, where those are the ones that kind of just looks like somebody's like, daydreaming or staring off into space, and no, they're actually having a seizure. And the what the neurologist had told like my family at the time was, if you're ever not sure if she's just daydreaming or having a seizure, like clap in front of her face like loud. And if she goes like, oh, like if she, snaps out of it, then okay, she was just daydreaming. But if it's like nothing, like no, she's not registering, then yeah, she's having an absence seizure. I feel like I was the one who maybe had the biggest misconceptions about it, but I'm obviously better educated on it now. Yes, very important. I mean, obviously I'm biased as somebody who, suffers with it. I think for me, I like, and again, this is probably a pretty biased, selfish answer, but for me, we don't have a clear-cut reason of like, why do I have epilepsy, but my brother doesn't, my parents don't. Like what exactly is the reasoning there? Like I ended up seeing a few different doctors. Like I saw like obviously multiple neurologists. I saw an dermatologist who I think is a neurologist who specializes in epilepsy. And I kind of got different answers like across the board. You know, so my dad is actually adopted. So we don't have like his full medical history on one side. Maybe there's something there, we'll never quite know for sure. But yeah, I had some doctors tell me, oh, it's a genetic, like you probably, there's somewhere in your family. But then I had another doctor who thinks that so I suffered a pretty severe concussion in May 2014, which was just a few months before I started having the fainting like seizures. And yeah, so it was a pretty severe concussion, and like I needed a lot of like physiotherapy, rehab kind of stuff. Like I even needed like vestibular therapy. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's basically like physical therapy for your eyeballs. Like the way that it had been described to me was, my brain and my eyes, they were having a hard time communicating, which is, like I was feeling sick a lot of the time, like nauseous. It was really hard to be in cars, things like that. So I had one doctor who really genuinely believed that had developed like post-traumatic epilepsy as a result of a traumatic brain injury, my concussion. The crappy part is there's like not really, they can't just run a blood test and be like, your reason for having epilepsy is this. It's anybody's guess in terms of like why I have it, why it, started at in my teens, and like why didn't it start in my childhood? Why was it at age 16? Why was that the magic number? There was another doctor who thought that I had had epilepsy all along. I think they like the way they explained it to me. I'm sure there's a much more medical scientific way to explain it, but explaining it to a 16-year-old, they thought that I had had it all along, but it was kind of like dormant until my concussion. So to go back to the original question, I do think epilepsy research funding it is very important because I know for a fact there are other people, not just in Canada, but like worldwide, who probably have a similar story to mine and want to know the why of like, okay, why is my brain different from my brother's or my parents or my husband's? Like, I would love to know the reasoning behind that. But I mean, beyond that, I want funding for research for the people who, are not as lucky as I am and don't respond well to medication and, have to go through invasive surgery. And sometimes even the surgery doesn't stop it. Like, I think about those people all the time and just remember how fortunate I am that, I mean, yeah, the experience sucked, but I am ultimately one of the lucky ones who I do get to have a pretty normal life because my medication works so well for me. So really for those people, those are the people that I want more research to be done so that they can have a normal life because I mean I know what it's like to not be able to live a normal life when you're regularly having seizures and you're constantly on edge of like, okay, when is my next one going to be? Is today going to be the day I have a seizure? Is like just that constant, yeah, those are some of the reasons why I think funding is so important, and unfortunately it is incredibly underfunded, which is upsetting, because I think there are many other conditions that, maybe aren't as life changing, yet they still get way more funding than epilepsy research does. So that's frustrating, and I'm hopeful that it'll change in the future. Um, yeah.